Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
All right, well, welcome to Getting to Know You. My name is Joe Nash. Today we're going to be talking to Blake Cortright. He's a senior at Shaker High. He's made this really nice documentary. We're going to talk to him for a little bit, and then we're going to show the documentary. It's about 25 minutes long. It's called The First Encampment. It's been receiving really good notices, and it is about the first Boy Scout camp up in Silver Bay and Lake George. So welcome, Blake. Thanks for coming by.
Thank you for having me.
I just want to congratulate you first on starting. You've already were telling me before we started, you've already sold 1,000 copies of this, and you've gotten some really good reviews. I'm going to read one little quick thing here from, I think this is Library Journal. It says, Blake Cortright is an Eagle Scout, and when he was 15 years old, he made this documentary on his iMac desktop, yet it looks as professional as anything shown on PBS or the History Channel, and I've already seen it, and I have to say, you'll see it in a few minutes. It is very well done, and so why don't you tell us a little bit of how you got the idea for this movie? I mean, we should start with, before you did this, you were a filmmaker. Why don't you talk a little bit about that first?
Yeah, I mean, since about 2006, me and my friend Matthew Elton have been doing, we were messing around with the cameras for a few years, and then in 2008, we started to work a little bit more seriously and produce more meaningful works than just our little fun YouTube videos. Yeah. We started to do work for our church and community, and then.
And you're a scout. During this time, you're a scout.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And in 2009, which is where the documentary picks up, I heard a presentation up at Silver Bay from a man named Bob James. Actually, no, this was 2008. 2009 was when I recorded it. And we went up with our scout troop because we had found out about the Silver Bay Council Ring. Mm-hmm. Which is to commemorate the site of the First Encampment. And so we went there, and Mr. James gave his 45-minute presentation around a campfire with nothing but a binder of old photographs, and all the boys from 17 to 12 had rapt attention the whole time. Oh, yeah. So that's when we knew there was something special to this story, that it kind of had an appeal to it. And we started talking on our way back about ways to go forward with this, things to do. So then the next year, 2009, when we went up, we filmed his presentation. We were inside. And my original intention was simply to preserve the history through the presentation and just have it as a sort of event video, I guess, like when you would go to... And
this presentation was what? It was a history of the First Encampment?
History of the First Encampment, the Council Ring, Boy Scouts in Silver Bay. Yeah.
All right, so the first time you just filmed his, so then you decided.
And then that was about August, and then around Thanksgiving that year, I really started to kick it into high gear and decided to try to make it into a documentary. Mm-hmm. And then about that time, Ken Burns had released his National Parks documentary on PBS, so I was watching that to get a feel for how the professionals made films, because I had no idea about historical documentaries.
Had you seen any Ken Burns films before, like the Civil War or any?
Yeah, I'd seen parts of the Civil War, but I was much younger at the time, and I hadn't really had much of an interest in it because, I was a typical, what was I then, 15-year-old, and it wasn't really any appeal to me. It was, the scouting history was interesting, but to me, I didn't spend a lot of time on PBS or History Channel. Okay. I didn't watch a lot of TV as it was, but...
So you saw the national parks, and you sort of, you were intrigued on, Ken Burns' style is very famous, so you sort of were seeing how... Well, I have to say, your movie is is very Ken Burnish. I know you're probably tired of hearing that, but it's very well done. So what was the next step? You filmed his presentation, and then how did you decide to break it up with the way you...
Well, as I was editing... around Thanksgiving, I got the presentation through, because originally I was just going to add in the photos that he was speaking, because the video was just of him, so you could hear him, and then, but then around Thanksgiving I decided I'm going to try something different, and we spoke to a filmmaker who had done many documentaries before, and many of which had been on national PBS, and he said, that I've got to make it either PBS hour or PBS half hour in order to get it aired. If
Oh,
I
you
go
needed
on, so.
certain time constraints. Okay.
And so he told me what that was. He gave me some other advice, and to get a professional narrator. And I actually one of the voices of the film, Kyle Carney, who was the voice of William Edel, he's a local scouter at Camp Rotary Scout Reservation.
This is the narrator.
This is the narrator's son.
Oh, okay.
And Kyle Kyle and I have been good friends at Rotary Scout Reservation, and he put me in touch with his dad, John Carney,
Okay.
who's a professional voice actor.
All right.
And
Well, that was-
he offered his services and just did an absolutely incredible job.
yeah, the narration is
Professional
very
narration.
very good. So one of your buddies' father was a professional actor. Well, you lucked into that then. So, how did you get it? Now this thing is 26 minutes long. How did you get it down to, or how much film did you have to work it to 26 minutes? Did you have way more than you?
Yeah, I had about 45 minutes of presentation, and then I
Of
started.
Mr. James.
Right.
Okay.
And then I started trimming through. I started putting in different photographs, and I started bringing it to life, adding music, adding sound. And then once we got voice actors to come in, so then Mr. James was an interviewee, and then Mr. Carney became the narrator and kind of the storyteller. And then I had the different voice actors who helped to bring it further to life and give it just a different dimension.
Okay. Now, in the movie, or I'm sorry, in the documentary, it's really a combination of the founding of the Boy Scouts of America plus the First Encampment. Was his presentation, did that include all that stuff about the beginning of scouting?
Yeah, most of it. And then
Okay.
towards the end, a lot of the kind of present day scouting stuff about Eagle Scouts and different people who were Eagle Scouts and the scouting movement today wasn't so much in his presentation. That was more our way to tie the history back to the present and kind
Okay.
of give it a little bit more life in that way.
All right. Now, before we see this documentary, I got just a couple more questions I want to ask you about from some of the things I noticed in here. One thing that comes up over and over in this is the importance to scouting of the Native American, the Native American ways, the Native American style, the Native American lore. How important, you're a scout, how important in your investigations of the history is all this Native American things to scouting? It seems like a lot of the scouting is based on a lot of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it shows in one sense in the symbolic nature. Obviously, the scout uniform is based more in a military sense.
Yeah.
But a lot of the awards and rank system is based more in a Native American sense,
Okay.
where the merit badges that are required to reach the highest rank of Eagle Scout do not have a gold rim around them. They have a silver rim because the Native Americans valued silver over gold. And the
Okay.
same is true where the highest awards aren't gold but are silver. And
Okay.
gold comes before. And also, there's a lot of different Indian lore merit badges and there's a mix though, because you have work that has to do with like scout training and military, which was Lord Baden-Powell in England's original plan. And then you have the more Native American elements, the conservation and things like that. And it's it's an incredible mix between developing those types of skills and leadership and citizenship. And it's just absolutely it's a wonderful program.
Okay, and speaking of that, one more question before we go to the documentary. One of the things that's mentioned in this film is that even back in 1910, it says, scouting was never really in tune with the times. So I wanted to ask you what, and here we are in 2011, your peers or your friends, who are not scouts, obviously scouts are probably a small minority, what do kids your age think of scouts or scouting?
A lot of people don't really know what it is, and a lot of people aren't interested in going into the woods and making a fire and sleeping under the stars and all the adventure of it. Because a lot of people are just kind of content to sit and on a computer or on the internet or whatever and kind of be a little apathetic about their community and so on. So it's not so much, when kids are younger, it's more of an immature joke. When they're older, it's more, they just don't seem to have the value of it. And they respect people who accomplish things in scouting, but they just it's not for me, it's not interesting to me. And then, of course, at a little younger age, they're kind of immature about it. But
Okay, so, well, the one thing about the Scouts, it is mentioned in this movie, the big building blocks are what morality, character building, and leadership.
Yeah.
So probably kids could probably use more of that, don't you think?
I agree, absolutely.
All right, so now we're going to see the movie, or the documentary, The First Encampment, and then we'll come back and talk to Blake for a couple more minutes and wrap it up.
The Boy Scouts of America was established in 1910. Soon after, the YMCA hosted an experimental camp at their Silver Bay Association in upstate New York. In a wooded area, this gathering of young men became the BSA's first encampment. Silver Bay, YMCA of the Adirondacks, located on the western shoreline of Lake George, is filled with history of upstate New York. Need and place came together in 1900 when Luther Wishart arrived at Lake George, scouting for a conference location where the Young Men's Christian Association could conduct leadership training. A close friend had recommended his uncle's new hotel on Lake George. Silas Payne had recently purchased the Silver Bay Hotel, where he offered guests a Sylvian fairyland, invigorating as an elixir. Wishart's proposal to reserve the hotel for Christian conferences met with Payne's full approval, provided they pay their own way. The first summer's program proved so successful that the Silver Bay Association incorporated after the second season of conferences in 1904. Another young men's organization was beginning to organize in America. After Sir Robert Baden-Powell organized the Boy Scouts in England in 1908, the idea quickly took root in many places and forms around the United States. Recognizing that the movement needed to be organized on a national level, the YMCA stepped in to help shape the process. Just 6 months after the formation of the Boy Scouts of America, Silver Bay hosted the first experimental training camp for Boy Scout leaders in 1910. Bob James, former Boy Scout and longtime Silver Bay guest and volunteer staff member, explains some of the history of this event.
It was an effort on the part of the men who, I guess, eventually became Scout leaders or who were trying to get Boy Scouting going in the United States to kind of test out the principles that they were working with and how they were going to do the whole thing, because I don't think they had a good idea. And so that's what this was, an experimental camp on. But they were using already existing boys groups that did substantially the same thing.
In 1910, 95% of the births took place at home. Only 6% of Americans were graduates of high school. Average life expectancy was 47 years. Anything operated by a battery or by electric power did not exist, with the exception of some telephones, not a lot, and possibly some electric lights, again, not a lot. So in that sense, a very different world. This is the automobile of the time, $1,250 it says, but the dollar at that time was worth a great deal more than it is now. There were only 144 miles of paved road in the entire country at that time, and the speed limit was usually 10 miles per hour. In 1910, the world population was 1.8 billion. Today, it's about 6 billion. The population more than tripled in 90 years. Boy Scouting started in England. Lieutenant General Sir Robert Baden-Powell had a long record in the British Army and was a scout in one sense of the word, as the leader of the constabulary in South Africa. He found that the ordinary process of military training was not effective with the men that were sent out to him from England.
It was inadequate. It taught the men how to care for a rifle but not how to care for themselves. They lacked fundamental character values such as dependability, initiative and resourcefulness.
To correct this situation, he wrote a book called Aids to Scouting. When he returned to England in 1903, he was asked to rewrite the book for boys. He accepted this challenge, but he first collected all the literature available on programs for boys, both English and American. This included the Boys Brigade, the YMCA, Seaton's Woodcraft Indians, Dan Beard's Sons of Daniel Boone, and many others not so well known. And Seaton gave him a copy of his book, The Birch Bark Roll. After years of study, Baden-Powell tested his scheme with a troop of 21 scouts on Brownsea Island in August 1907. The test met his expectations, and he published his book in 1908 as the world-famous Scouting for Boys. It is interesting to note that his program was somewhat similar to that of Seaton's Woodcraft Indians.
All boys are inherently scouts. We all have started a fire and cooked potatoes to a crisp and eaten them with gusto.
Baden-Powell told a story about two small boys who had a tent in the backyard.
One evening, one asked the other how they were to see to undress when they went to bed, and the other boy replied by the light of the panther's eyes. Only one of the boys slept out that night.
The word scout was used because it would attract boys. Baden-Powell once said,
Had we called it what it is, a society for the propagation of moral attributes, the boy would not exactly have rushed for it. But call it scouting, and give him a chance to become an embryo scout, and you have quite another pair of shoes.
William Boyce was a Chicago publisher. He had an interest in the welfare of boys and employed about 25,000 of them in his publishing business. He also had money, and it was his contributions to a new struggling organization that made it possible for scouting to survive in America.
William Boyce was a publisher, lived in Chicago. And he, of course, he employed, because he had newspapers, he employed a lot of boys. So he was concerned about boys. He had gone over to London, England, for a business meeting of some kind. And apparently he arrived there in a fog and was unable to locate the place that where he was supposed to meet somebody. And this boy in a uniform came up to me, or up to him, because he obviously looked lost. And the boy said, "Can I help you?" And Boyce told him what he was looking for. And the boy took him and led him to where he wanted to go. And then Boyce was going to give him some money, but he refused that. He said, "I'm a Boy Scout. I won't take anything." And this kind of puzzled Boyce. He said, "I would like to know more about Boy Scouting." But the boy said, I'll wait here for you until you're finished. And he did. When he came back out, the boy was still there waiting. He took Boyce into the Scout headquarters, where he learned a lot more about Boy Scouting there. And he picked up, I think, a whole trunk full of uniforms and other things related to the uniform and to Boy Scouting, and brought him back to this country. And then he went down to Washington, D.C., and I guess he had to pay for it. In effect, he purchased the name Boy Scouts of America. So now he owned it.
An oddity in Scouting's history is that the YMCA chose to serve temporarily as Scouting's nurse in both England and America. A number of American YMCA workers got Baden-Powell's book and started Scout troops in 1908 and 1909. Some also used Seaton's Woodcraft Indian Handbook, The Birch Bark Roll, even earlier. The YMCA's leadership noted this, and after long thought, endorsed it. Edgar Robinson was the executive secretary of the National Boys Work Committee, and he warned the other YMCA officers,
"An avalanche is coming. Be prepared" is the Boy Scout motto.
Robinson became the nucleus, almost invisible, eventually almost forgotten, around which many forces were to coalesce into the Boy Scouts of America.
He is a man, Edgar Robinson is the man who made it all happen. He's the one you don't hear about much. But without him, this would never have happened. I mean, the Boy Scouts would never have been formed without him. He pulled things together. He pulled in people and so forth. For instance, in the example with Boyce, when he learned that Boyce had the name, or owned the name, he jumped on the first train to Chicago and went out to talk to Boyce. And but when the conversation was over, Boyce was willing to give this new organization $1,000 a month. That was a lot more than it is now. Now this was 1910, and so that's what his kind of thing he was doing. Then he pulled in Seton and other people into this whole thing. He was the glue that pulled everything together and held it together.
He first contacted Seton, who agreed to bring his Woodcraft Indians into the Boy Scouts. They both then began contacting the leaders of budding Boy Scout organizations, and following Baden-Powell's good example of an experimental camp, they set up America's first Boy Scout camp at Silver Bay to be held in mid-August. Its aim was to train adult Scout leaders as well as future Boy Scouts. From 20 cities came groups of 7 YMCA teenagers, each group volunteer adult. The only reasonable way to travel was by train pulled by a steam locomotive. The track had only recently been extended from Glens Falls to Lake George Village, which had recently changed its name from Caldwell. At Lake George Village, it was necessary to change to a steamboat because there was no road along the west side of Lake George. When they reached Silver Bay, the boys found unexpectedly a large hotel, other buildings, many cottages, almost a town. There was even an auditorium, a store, and a post office. The boys were directed away from all of these evidences of civilization. By a narrow path through the woods, they came to a large clearing of several acres. Each group came with a homemade teepee, equipment for cooking over an open fire as prescribed by Seton. Everyone camped Indian style in loose circles. In addition to the boys, about 200 would-be scoutmasters also encamped. William Murray, a member of the boys' work committee of the YMCA, was in charge with Ernest Thompson Seton as chief scout. Baden-Powell was not able to attend, and his associate, W.B. Wakefield, came over from England to attend the camp and give instructions to scoutmasters. Seton's assistants were Charles Horton, director of training schools and camps, and John Alexander, managing secretary of the Boy Scouts of America. Seton included as much British scouting as he saw fit, but he gave many hours to woodcraft Indian ways. He was a tall, theatrical figure in his buckskins, telling hypnotic stories or whooping and prancing through tribal dances with his long hair flying.
They were using already existing boys' clubs or groups or whatever they were called. Seton had one, for example, and so forth. There must have been probably a dozen different ones around at one time. Most of them you never heard of. I'd never heard of any of them, I don't think, before.
This is the council ring area, right where the council ring is now. I want to identify a boy. You see the boy right there with the feather sticking up there? His name is William Adel, and he is the only person we know of that wrote anything about this encampment.
This was a boy that was at the encampment, and He's the only one I know of that wrote anything about it. But he didn't write it as a diary. It was written many, many years later. I think he was in his 90s when he wrote this up. And yet that's the only source we have of what actually happened at that encampment.
Here's one of the things that he wrote.
From the very first day, Seaton's program of woodcraft went into operation. There were nature walks, tree and plant recognition sessions, and nighttime lectures on stars. Then there were discussions on health, first aid, camp sanitation, campfire cooking, survival in the woods, and all the hundreds of things a woodsman must know. All of these activities were met with unexpected enthusiasm. There was a sense of something important about to happen.
Near the end of the camp, a day was set aside for climbing Black Mountain, the highest peak around Lake George. Actually a climb of about 2,400 feet. Dr. Edel again.
In small boats, we crossed Lake George at the first rays of the rising sun and went south about 5 miles. In a compact column, we walked a couple of miles to the base of the mountain and then began the climb. I was a city boy and had never climbed anything higher than the Washington Monument. Black Mountain is 5 times as high, and I was one of the slower hikers.
Seaton is in front, wearing a cap, bow tie, long sleeve white shirt, and long pants. The third person in the top row from the left is Daniel Carter Beard. He was an old-time woodsman and founder of the Sons of Daniel Boone. He was invited to the camp and was in charge during the last 2 days. He showed the campers how to throw axes, how to make flint and steel, how to catch squirrels and fix them for eating. Dan Beard became a national commissioner and was chairman of the National Court of Honor for the rest of his life. On the last day of the camp, a city fellow dropped in. His name was James West. He was a rising lawyer and a dynamic YMCA worker in Washington. Nobody now alive can guess how he came to be at Silver Bay. He apparently talked impressively and emphatically because in November he was offered the permanent position of Chief Scout Executive, and he accepted. Long afterwards, Robinson wrote,
The real history of scouting began with the coming of Mr. West. Before that time, we were really preparing to start, to begin to get ready to commence.
The first encampment in August 1910 was a success. For the next 2 years, Silver Bay hosted leadership training camps for the Boy Scouts of America. The successive camps in 1911 and 1912 included training material, camp skills, Indian lore, and scouting games. Some of the early pioneers of Boy Scouts attended these camps, laying the foundation upon which American scouting began. One of these early leaders was Dr. Charles Eastman, a Native American from the Dakota Territory. As with Seaton, Dr. Eastman helped to bring Native American thought into scouting.
He came to the Scoutmasters training in 1912 and was one of their instructors. He instructed real Indian craft. In other words, how to use how to put up a tent, how to build a lodge, and other things like that. He also taught Indian games, so forth.
In the fall of 1910, Seaton, Beard, and Powell finally got together in New York City and then also at a banquet held in Baden-Powell's honor.
In 1911, George Barton published the first edition of Boy's Life magazine. The Boy Scouts of America purchased the magazine in 1912, and in that year it had a circulation of 6,000. Today, Boy's Life has over 1 million subscribers. Seaton parted ways with the Boy Scouts in 1915. He was a Scots-Canadian, born in England of Scottish parents. His family had moved to Canada in 1866, and he spent most of his childhood in Toronto. He later moved to America, building an estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. Seton and Beard's work form much of the basis for the traditional scouting movement in America. Seton was the author of the first Boy Scout handbook, which drew greatly from Powell's book, Scouting for Boys. Seton was chief scout of the BSA from 1910 to 1915. However, he had significant personality and philosophical clashes with Beard and James West. In addition to disputes about the content of Seton's contributions to the Boy Scout handbook, conflicts also arose about the suffrage activities of his wife Grace and his British Canadian citizenship. The citizenship issue arose partly because of his high position within the BSA and the federal charter West was attempting to obtain. The BSA required its board members to be American citizens.
Seton did not stay in the Boy Scouts of America. Once the organization got going, they all decided that all the leaders should be citizens of the United States. But when they went to Seton with this, he refused. He was, I believe, Canadian, and he refused to become a citizen of the United States. As a result, he was dropped out, I guess. At any rate, he was gone. That ended his association with the Boy Scouts.
Seton drafted his written resignation on January 29, 1915. These original Boy Scout encampments were almost forgotten. However, more than 30 years later, YMCA leadership, along with the Boy Scouts of America, came together to recognize the historical significance of these first camps. In 1947, the Council Campfire Ring at Silver Bay was dedicated, commemorating these early Boy Scout gatherings. And today, in the exact location where the original encampment was held, the Council Ring at Silver Bay, complete with the memorial plaques and an eagle bench, stands as a testimony to these events. Although times have changed, the core values of scouting remain intact. The resourcefulness, the morals, and the qualities which Baden-Powell put forth continue to be the cornerstone of scouting for boys.
Scouting has never been in tune with the times. Even in 1908, it was idiotic to suggest that you could go out and do camping because everybody knew that the night air was bad for you. You might get malaria, for heaven's sake. The only ones who did camping were those idiots who wanted to explore the world, and the military who had to go camping. The idea of cooking a meal over an open fire when your mother at home was perfectly willing to cook your meal over a coal fire, and this idea of sitting around a campfire when you had a perfectly good kerosene lamp burning in your living room at home. It was exactly because it was idiotic and out of tune with the times that made scouting appealing. It goes back to the atavistic thing that is supposed to be in every human being to play Tarzan and Robinson Crusoe and so on. William Greenbar Bill, Hillcourt, 1969.
This goes back to Baden-Powell. I think the things that he felt should be taught then should also be taught now. It's morality, I suppose, in a sense, or related to it. Also, it's certain character building as well. I think that Boy Scouting teaches important things that you find are not always taught in the home. They're certainly not taught in the schools. You would expect that. It also teaches leadership, and for some people that's the most important point.
After its humble beginning, Scout troops began sprouting up all across America. Today, there are over 41,000 registered troops with over 1 million registered Boy Scouts. Since its inception, over 80 million boys have been involved with the Scout movement in America. Of all the boys that begin in scouting, only 4% become Eagle Scouts. Many of these boys have gone on to hold influential roles of leadership throughout our country. Over 35 astronauts were Eagle Scouts. There have been several congressmen, U.S. senators, state governors, university presidents, and CEOs of corporations that have held the rank of Eagle Scout. Countless military leaders received this rank, and the list also includes a U.S. Supreme Court Justice and one American president. What started from a handful of disassociated groups of young men at a small encampment in upstate New York has blossomed into one of the most significant young men's organizations in America.
All right, well, welcome back. We hope you enjoyed the documentary. It's going to wrap things up here with Blake. The website, which will be on the screen here, the First Encampment, thefirstencampment.com, is it? Mm-hmm. And also his company, which we're going to talk about a little bit, is called plasmaproductions.com, right?
.net.
I'm sorry, plasmaproductions.net, which will be on the screen here. So what do you do now that you're a filmmaker? This is your first long feature-length film. This Plasma Productions, your little company, what kind of things do you do that if people wanted to, I guess people can hire you, can't they, or what? Yeah. So you film weddings and you make little movies, okay.
I do weddings, promotional videos, commercial videos, website videos, basically just trying to use the power of media to help people communicate ideas.
And on the website, there's examples of some little commercials you made and some little weddings and things if you want to hire Blake. But so what's in your future here? You were telling me before we started, is documentary filmmaking going to be sort of a career path for you, or?
I think it's kind of a good way for me to go right now because it's not as expensive as feature filmmaking, obviously. And
probably. And
in some ways, it's more interesting because it is such realism. And I think that a lot of really good filmmakers that I like, who aren't necessarily as well known, they have a much more documentary style and I like it because it's much more grounded in the reality of things and not so much in the bombastic.
I'm a big fan of documentaries myself. I mean, just in general, I guess I'm tired of movies with explosions every 3 seconds. So do you have any other plans for making anything to do with scouting? I mean, this was really very well done and so good that. Do you want to do something a little bit longer on Scouts? Are you going to have any plans on that? Or?
I have been drafting some ideas for a documentary about the founders of Scouting.
The three men we just saw. Okay.
And really focus in on Seton, Beard, and West, because they all have very, very interesting stories, and I've learned a lot about them just in the doing of the First Encampment. And I met some wonderful people as a result of doing this documentary who have relation to some of the individuals in the documentary, or have knowledge about them and have researched them. So I'm going to pursue telling that type of story about the founders and making it a longer, maybe even a national documentary.
Very good. There is that show on PBS, The American Experience. I don't know if they've ever done Scouts. I mean, maybe you can get your thing. Well, Blake, thanks for coming by. We really appreciate you stopping by and telling us about the movie, and we wish you a lot of success. You can, we have this video here at the library if you want to come and check it out, or you can go to the website and you can buy one too, and the First Encampment. And so thank you, Blake, for stopping by.
Thank you very much.
So that is it for Getting to Know You. We'll see you next time.